In April 2013, the body of 38-year-old Amy Caldwell was found in the front seat of her SUV in the parking lot of Miller's grocery store in Cedar Grove, Indiana. An investigation would soon uncover the shocking double life of her husband, Daniel Caldwell, a well-respected financial advisor who had been hiding a devastating secret for nearly a decade. On that cold morning of April 6, 2013, Cedar Grove, Indiana woke up to what would soon become the town's most unthinkable tragedy. The call came into 911 dispatch at 11:02 a.m. A woman in clear distress reported seeing a motionless figure inside a red Chevrolet Tahoe in the parking lot of Miller's grocery store. The caller, a middle-aged woman who had parked 2 spaces away, said she first thought the driver had passed out, but as she moved closer, she saw something far worse, a thick pool of blood spreading across the dashboard, dripping onto the front seats. Within minutes, 2 patrol officers arrived, their flashing lights reflecting off the wet pavement from an early morning drizzle. When they approached the vehicle, the first officer instinctively reached for his radio. He had seen enough death in his years on the force to know that this woman, whoever she was long past saving. Her body was unnaturally still, her head tilted forward against the steering wheel. Her hair, dark brown with soft curls, partially covered her face, but even from outside the vehicle, the sight of her deeply slashed throat was unmistakable. The cut was clean but wide, as though whoever had done it wanted to be sure she would never take another breath. The officers immediately secured the scene, roping off the area as customers and store employees gathered at a distance, their whispers filling the air. It didn't take long to identify the victim. The name Amy Caldwell meant something to almost everyone in Cedar Grove. She was known, respected, and loved. She was the woman who volunteered at school bake sales, the one who always smiled at checkout clerks, the kind of person who never missed a Sunday service at the church on Maple Street. A wife, a mother, a woman who, until that morning, had lived a life that seemed untouchable by tragedy. But something happened inside that grocery store, something that changed everything. Surveillance footage from inside Miller's grocery provided chilling insight into Amy's last moments. At 10:42 a.m., she had walked into the store, her hair slightly damp from the morning mist, wearing jeans and a soft blue sweater. She moved through the aisles like any other Saturday morning, casually browsing the shelves, picking up a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs, a bottle of orange juice. Everything seemed normal. But then at 10:49 a.m., Amy reached aisle 6, and suddenly she stopped moving. Her body tensed, her right hand tightened around the shopping basket's handle. For 5 full seconds, she didn't blink. She just stared. The footage, when played back, didn't immediately reveal what or who she had seen, but those few seconds spoke volumes. There was no confusion in her expression, no curiosity, no hesitation, just raw, undeniable shock. Then she did something that stood out. She dropped the shopping basket. The eggs inside cracked upon impact, yolk spreading across the tile. A bottle of orange juice rolled away, stopping against the wheel of another cart. She didn't try to pick anything up. She didn't look back. She just turned around and walked out. By 10:52 a.m., Amy was seen rushing through the sliding doors of the store, her arms shaking as she reached into her purse for her keys. At 10:58 a.m., she was already inside her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel. The footage captured her muttering to herself, her eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the store's entrance, as if she expected someone to follow her. She didn't turn on the engine right away. Instead, she sat there, her breath visible against the cool morning air, her head shaking slightly, as though trying to convince herself that what she had just seen wasn't real. And then at 11:01 a.m., the camera caught a shadow moving past her car. The figure didn't stop, didn't hesitate. 5 seconds later, Amy Caldwell was dead. The first officer on the scene knew right away. This wasn't a random carjacking, nor was it an attempted robbery gone wrong. This was deliberate, calculated, personal. Whoever had killed Amy hadn't taken anything from her car, not her purse, not her phone, not even the gold ring still sitting untouched on her left hand. By April 8, 2013, the investigation had zeroed in on a suspect, Daniel Caldwell, Amy's husband. The news sent shockwaves through Cedar Grove. Daniel was a financial advisor, a family man, and an active member of the community. He had been married to Amy for 15 years, had built a life with her. To anyone looking in, he was the kind of man people trusted with their money, their homes, their futures. He wasn't the kind of man who murdered his wife in broad daylight. Or so everyone thought. The Cedar Grove Police Department worked fast. By April 10, 2013, investigators had searched the Caldwell home, combed through Daniel's work history, phone records, and financial transactions. Every step of their investigation painted a picture of a man with a double life, a life that Amy had discovered that morning in aisle 6. By April 20, 2013, the evidence was overwhelming. The surveillance footage, the frantic phone calls Amy had made just minutes before her death, the financial records showing unaccounted transactions to an unknown woman, the undeniable connection between Daniel and whatever had made Amy run out of that store in fear, it all pointed in one direction. On April 20, 2013, at 6:45 a.m., Daniel Caldwell was arrested at his office on first-degree murder charges. Even as he was led out in handcuffs, he didn't say a word. The question remained. What had Amy seen that morning? What had made her drop everything and run? And more importantly, why did it cost her life? The answer lay in the one thing no one ever thought to question. Daniel Caldwell had been living a perfectly crafted lie. And on that quiet April morning in the middle of a grocery store aisle, his wife had seen the truth. For 15 years, Amy Caldwell had lived in the quiet certainty that her life was exactly as it should be. She had married young at just 23 to a man she believed was her forever. Daniel had been steady, reliable, and ambitious, a man with a vision for their future, a provider in every sense of the word. By 2013, their home in Cedar Grove had become a picture of suburban comfort. A spacious 2-story house with a white picket fence, a lush backyard where their 2 children, Maggie and Ethan, had spent their childhood chasing fireflies on summer nights. Inside, the scent of fresh-baked cookies and cinnamon candles often lingered in the air. Amy had made their house a home, warm, welcoming, the kind of place where love was supposed to grow. But in the months before April 6, 2013, something had shifted. It wasn't one dramatic moment. No yelling, no accusations, no shattered plates on the kitchen floor. Just a slow, creeping feeling that something wasn't right. Daniel had begun coming home later than usual. The once expected 6:30 p.m. arrival turned into 7:45 p.m., then past 9 p.m., always followed by the same excuses: late meetings, traffic, unexpected work obligations. Amy never questioned him, not at first. She had trusted him, believed in the foundation they had built. But then came the small things, the ones that gnawed at her long after the house had gone quiet for the night. His phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter, was now always in his pocket. His text notifications, which she had once glanced at without thinking, were now muted. When she would lean over to hug him, she noticed the scent of a perfume she did not wear clinging faintly to his collar. Then there was the blonde hair. It had been an ordinary Tuesday evening in early March 2013. Amy had picked up Daniel's suit jacket from the laundry hamper, the same way she always did, ready to take it to the dry cleaners the next morning, but as she draped it over her arm, she noticed a strand of long golden hair clinging to the fabric. Amy's hair was brown. She had stared at it for a moment, her mind searching for logic. A colleague's, a stranger's, the woman who sat beside him at work. She had told herself not to overthink it. People brushed past each other all the time, but then, just a week later, she had found another one. Her mind had raced that night as she lay in bed beside him, listening to his slow, even breathing. Was she imagining things? Was she being paranoid? By the time the calendar flipped to April 2013, she had started to feel like a woman standing at the edge of something terrifying. She could not name it, could not put words to it, but it was there, a presence just beyond her line of sight. She had almost convinced herself it was nothing until that morning at the grocery store. It had started like any other Saturday. The sky was cloudy but bright, the crisp spring air carrying the scent of freshly cut grass, as Amy pulled into the parking lot of Miller's grocery store. She had a list folded neatly in her purse: chicken breast, fresh vegetables, eggs, bread. She had been planning a special dinner, a family meal before Daniel's supposed business trip to Chicago the next day. She had walked through the automatic doors at 10:42 a.m., greeted the familiar faces behind the checkout counters, and made her way through the aisles, picking up ingredients without much thought. But then, at 10:49 a.m., her world stopped. She had turned into aisle 6, reaching for a box of cereal, when her breath caught in her throat. A little girl stood just a few feet away, no older than 6. Amy's heart pounded. There was something about her, something that pulled Amy's gaze in and wouldn't let her look away. The shape of her nose, the dimple that appeared when she shifted her weight, the freckles scattered across her cheeks, and then the eyes. They were exactly like Ethan's, not just similar, identical. A dull ringing filled Amy's ears. Her hands gripped the edge of the shopping cart, her knuckles turning white. Her mind screamed at her to look away, to ignore the thought creeping into the head, but she couldn't move. And then, before she could make sense of it, another figure appeared beside the girl. A woman Amy had never seen before. She was young, maybe in her early 30s, with long blonde hair that cascaded over her shoulders. Her expression was soft, maternal, her body language familiar, as she reached down, touched the little girl's shoulder, and gently guided her away. Amy's stomach turned. Who was she? Why did that child look exactly like her son? Amy's vision blurred, her pulse roaring in her ears. She felt like the floor beneath her was shifting, tilting, throwing her off balance. And then the final blow. As the woman and child stepped away, Amy heard something so small, so casual, but so earth-shattering, it sent ice through her veins. A single sentence, spoken with the kind of natural ease that only someone who believed their world was safe could have used. And just like that, the illusion shattered. She didn't think. She didn't stop to breathe. At 10:52 a.m., she dropped the shopping basket. The eggs splattered on the floor, the juice carton rolled away, but she didn't notice. She turned around and walked out of the store, moving on instinct, her legs carrying her as far from that aisle as possible. By 10:58 a.m., she was already inside her Chevrolet Tahoe, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Her breaths were sharp, uneven, her mind racing. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't paranoia. Daniel had a child with another woman, a child the same age as their own son. Her husband had built an entire life, a second family that she never knew existed. She had spent 15 years believing in a marriage that had been a lie. At 11:01 a.m., as she sat in the driver's seat, staring blankly at the dashboard, her body still trembling from the weight of the realization, she didn't see the shadow moving outside her car. She didn't see him coming. By 11:02 a.m., Amy Caldwell was dead. By the time police arrested Daniel Caldwell on April 20th, 2013, Cedar Grove had already been shaken to its core. The crime itself had been horrific enough, a beloved wife and mother brutally murdered in a grocery store parking lot. But what came next was something far more chilling. As investigators began digging into Daniel's life, finances, and movements, they quickly realized Amy's murder wasn't the result of a sudden burst of rage. It was the final step in a carefully crafted double life, one that had been unraveling long before Amy stumbled into the truth. The deeper detectives looked, the darker the reality became. On April 22nd, 2013, just 2 days after his arrest, the Cedar Grove Police Department received a tip from an unexpected source. A Columbus-based real estate agent named Rebecca Lawson had seen the news and recognized Daniel Caldwell's face. She did not recognize him as a murderer. She recognized him as her husband. Rebecca, 33 years old, had been married to Daniel for 8 years. Their daughter, Lily, had just turned 6 in February. She knew him as David Lawson, a devoted husband, a caring father, a business consultant who often traveled between Columbus and various out-of-state clients. She had watched the news report twice before calling the police, her hands shaking as she dialed. She had spent nearly a decade believing she was the only woman he loved. Within hours, detectives pulled Daniel's financial records. What they found was impossible to ignore. Daniel had been living 2 lives, splitting his time between Cedar Grove, Indiana, and Columbus, Ohio, just 2 hours apart. He had used separate bank accounts, 2 sets of IDs, different billing addresses, and even 2 different birthdays when registering documents. Amy Caldwell and Rebecca Lawson had been married to the same man at the same time, completely unaware of each other's existence. Detectives mapped out Daniel's movements over the past 10 years, going through airline tickets, hotel stays, and vehicle toll records. The timeline was meticulous, almost like a well-rehearsed performance. Monday to Wednesday, Daniel was in Cedar Grove playing the role of the devoted family man. Thursday to Saturday, he was in Columbus, slipping seamlessly into the life of David Lawson, Rebecca's husband, and Lily's father. Sundays were rotated. Every other week he would choose which family to spend it with. For nearly a decade, he had walked between 2 worlds, careful never to let them collide. He had excuses for everything. If he needed to stay an extra day in Columbus, he told Amy his investment firm had last-minute meetings. If he left early for Cedar Grove, he told Rebecca he had to fly out to New York for work. Business trips, traffic, airport delays. These were the lies that kept him safe, and he hadn't just lied about his location. Daniel had built 2 entire personalities to match the families he had created. With Amy, he was the family man, polished suits, church on Sundays, PTA meetings, a well-respected financial advisor who loved nothing more than spending time with his wife and kids. With Rebecca, he was different, more casual, more adventurous. He drove a black Dodge Ram instead of a sleek sedan, wore jeans instead of tailored slacks, and attended real estate networking events instead of school functions. And somehow, for nearly 10 years, it had worked. Until April 6th, 2013. Until Amy Caldwell walked into Miller's Grocery and saw the face of a child that shouldn't exist. As investigators went through Daniel's bank statements, another disturbing truth emerged. Months before Amy's death, Daniel had been making large, untraceable transfers to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Detectives tracked the first transaction back to September 2012, just 7 months before the murder. The amount started small, just a few $1,000s, but by March 2013, the deposits had grown to over $250,000. Daniel hadn't just been hiding a second family, he had been preparing to disappear. The records showed he had booked a one-way flight to Belize for April 22, 2013, just 2 days after he was arrested. The pieces started falling into place. Amy was never supposed to find out. Daniel had been planning to leave without telling either woman. He had planned to drain his accounts, board a plane, and disappear, leaving both wives behind to wonder what had happened. But Amy had ruined everything when she had walked into that grocery store. By April 26, 2013, Cedar Grove detectives had enough undeniable evidence to present the full case against Daniel Caldwell. The prosecution painted a terrifying picture. Daniel had been a sociopath, a man who had constructed an illusion so airtight no one had ever questioned it. But in less than 10 seconds, Amy destroyed it all. That morning in aisle 6, she had seen the truth. And in less than an hour, she was dead. Her murder had not been an act of rage, it had been an act of survival. Daniel's last desperate attempt to keep his double life from being exposed. But he had failed. Amy had died, but her death had left a trail of secrets too big to be buried. By May 5th, 2013, prosecutors were preparing for trial. The charge? First-degree murder with intent to conceal another crime. A crime that had lasted 10 years. And on that ordinary April morning in a grocery store aisle, lined with cereal boxes, Daniel Caldwell's perfect lie fell apart. On the morning of September 14th, 2013, the doors of the Jefferson County Courthouse opened to a crowd that had gathered long before sunrise. The murder of Amy Caldwell had been shocking enough, but the discovery of Daniel Caldwell's secret life had turned the case into something even more monstrous. It was no longer just about a man who had killed his wife, it was about a web of deception so deep no one who knew him had ever seen it coming. Inside the courthouse, the courtroom was filled to capacity. The press had been covering the case for months, and the town of Cedar Grove had become obsessed with every detail. The sight of Daniel Caldwell being escorted in by officers wearing an orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled together, was something no one in that room would ever forget. He had once been the respected financial advisor, the man neighbors trusted with their savings, the man who spoke kindly to cashiers, who mowed his lawn every Sunday like clockwork. Now, he was just a murderer on trial, his carefully built life reduced to evidence in a courtroom. The prosecution was relentless. They presented the case with precision, laying out the facts in a way that made it impossible to argue against. Surveillance footage placed him near the grocery store at the time of the murder. Amy's car was found with his fingerprints on the door handle. Phone records showed he had called Rebecca Lawson just moments after the crime, likely setting up an alibi. Forensic evidence tied him to the crime scene. It wasn't just murder, it was calculated, deliberate, and cruel. The jurors watched footage of Amy's last moments, how she had frozen in aisle 6, how she had dropped her shopping basket and fled the store. They saw her panic, her confusion, her realization that her world had just collapsed around her. And they saw what happened after, how she had sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel, before Daniel approached from behind, how he had ended her life in a single, brutal motion before walking away as if nothing had happened. Witness after witness took the stand. Amy's closest friends described the months of confusion leading up to her death, how she had started noticing changes in Daniel, how she had found blonde hairs on his suit, how she had confessed just days before she died that something about her husband felt off. The lead detective outlined how Daniel had been living a double life for nearly a decade, his two families just 2 hours apart, both believing they were the only ones who mattered. Rebecca Lawson, his second wife, sat in stunned silence, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. When the prosecution laid out the full truth, how Daniel had planned to leave both women and disappear, how he had been secretly transferring large sums of money to an offshore account, how Amy had unknowingly ruined everything just by walking into the wrong grocery store at the wrong time. She collapsed into tears, and then the most haunting part of all. Maggie and Ethan Caldwell, Amy's children, sat in the courtroom, their small bodies lost in oversized chairs, listening as their father's betrayals, lies, and ultimate crime were laid bare before them. They had started the year with 2 parents. They would end it with neither. By the time October 10th, 2013 arrived, the courtroom felt heavier than it had at the start of the trial. The weight of grief, loss, and betrayal filled the air. The jury had been given everything they needed to see the truth. And after just 5 hours of deliberation, they returned with their verdict. Daniel Caldwell was guilty of first-degree murder. The words sent a ripple through the room. Rebecca Lawson, who had spent 8 years believing she was a loved wife, collapsed in her seat, the reality of what she had unknowingly been part of finally crushing her. Maggie, just 14 years old, gripped her younger brother's hand, her face void of emotion, as if her mind had long since stopped trying to process what was happening. Daniel, the man who had once lived so carefully, who had built his life on flawless deception, did not react. For the first time since the trial began, he looked smaller, as if the walls of his reality had finally closed in on him, as if he realized there was no escape left. When the judge announced his sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole, it was final. There would be no second chance, no chance to rewrite the narrative, no more carefully planned excuses, lies, or manipulations. The man who had spent 10 years living in control of 2 families, 2 separate worlds, and 2 carefully constructed identities had now lost everything. He would never be free again, and for the first time since Amy Caldwell had died, justice felt real. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our daily updates, and check out another insane case we covered, the case where a newlywed wife was beaten to death on her Hawaii honeymoon. Make sure to check it out and let us know your thoughts in the comments section.